Welcome. So in this lesson, we're going to be talking about reflections. So there are two types of reflections. There are reflections in the x-axis and reflections in the y-axis. Let's begin by talking about reflections in the x-axis. So here is a point, 2, 2. If I was to reflect this in the x-axis, it's now going to be here. Now, what's the coordinates of this point right here? Well, it's going to be 2 and -2. So as you can see, when we reflect in the x-axis, it's my y value that changes sign. As you can see here, my y value went from 2 to -2. And this is the very important point that you need to realize, that when you're reflecting in the x-axis, it's your y value that changes sign. Y dash becomes -y when x dash just stays as x. You can see what it looks like to reflect an entire graph in the x-axis. So here is an example of that here. So a reflection in the x-axis can be defined by the rule this. And as you can see, it is my y value that is changing sign. So I start with this, and I'm going to reflect it in the x-axis. So now it becomes down here. And as you can see, I went from a y value of 1 to -1. So reflecting it across the x-axis. The other type of reflection is reflecting in the y-axis. So if I start here and I reflect in the y-axis, it means I'm going to come over here. Now, what is the coordinates of this point? It's going to be -2, 2. So as you can see, it is my x value that changed signs. My y value stayed the same. So if we look here for a moment, we can see that my x dash becomes -x, my y dash just stays y. So when you're reflecting in the y-axis, it's your x value that changes sign. And you can see what it looks like to reflect an entire graph across the y-axis. If I can get this correct, there we go. A reflection in the y-axis can be defined by this rule. As you can see, we're starting here. We reflect in the y-axis, it goes over there. And as you can see, it is my x value that changes. All right, let's write down some rules that we need to follow. All right, so when you're reflecting in the x-axis, my x dash just stays the same. It's my y dash that changes. So when you're reflecting in the x-axis, it's your y that changes sign. So too, when you're reflecting in the y-axis, my x dash now becomes -x and my y stays the same. So just like dilations. So just like dilations that affect the opposite one. So a dilation in the x-axis affected your y value. So too, a reflection in the x-axis affects your y value. So you just need to think that through when you're going through these questions, and just always remember those things. All right, let's just go through this example here and see how we go with it. All right, so here it says, find the image of the point 1, -5 after a reflection in the x-axis. So we could go about this a long way. We're starting with a point. Whoops, let's make that a bit prettier. And I'm going to a new point, x dash, y dash. I'm reflecting in the x-axis, right? I'm reflecting in the x-axis. That means my x value stays the same. It's my y value that changes. So my y dash is -y. Now, if the point that I'm starting with is 1, -5, that means my x is just 1, and then my y is going to swap signs, as you can see. My final answer will be 1, 5. That is my final answer. So as you can see, if you wanted to do it quickly, you could have just swapped the sign of -5 and just said, well, it's now 5. So if we wanted to do this one a bit quicker, the reflection in the y-axis, that means I'm just going to change the sign in front of my x. It's going to be -1, -5. But it's important that you can understand the steps that lie behind that and understand the process of it. So if we wanted to write it out in full, you don't need to, but if you wanted to write it in full, you're thinking in your head, well, I've got a point. I'm going to my new point. I know that I'm reflecting in the y-axis, which means my x values are changing. So x dash is -x. And then I'm going to get my y dash doesn't change. Then we keep on going. You'd get 1, -5 is the point that I'm starting with. So it's going to become -1, -5. So just important that you can think it through and understand what's going on. So that is an introduction to what it means to do a reflection.